This is Jeeves, and welcome to How Can Faith Help Tackle Artificial Intelligence? In this Imperial College special, I'll be welcoming Sina, a French Imperial College student studying a double Masters in Physics and Electronic Engineering. He's a representative of the Baha'i faith, a less well-known faith, which was one of the reasons why I was really excited to have him on the podcast. We also have Matt Bonner, who's a PhD student, studying how to design fire-safe walls for tall buildings, and he's our Buddhist representative. He's always searched for understanding of the universe, both through faith and scientific study. He's currently feeling really nervous about speaking on behalf of a faith as diverse as Buddhism, but I think he did an excellent job. You might hear another voice as well. He features more in part 2 of the discussion, but that's Karuna Priya, who studied Buddhist philosophy. He currently works at Imperial. To give you an outline of part 1, we of course talk about how faith can be integrated within the AI debate. AI safety and whether AI machines may be able to adopt a religion are also discussed. We spend a lot of time exploring the relationship between AI and morality. Who is ethically qualified enough to program morals into AI machines? Could AI learn morals itself? That was a long intro, so now on to the discussion. As always, the views expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of Faith Forum for London. Enjoy. How are you guys doing today?
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
I'm good. So let's get straight into it. For you, let's start off with our Buddhist representative, Matt. What
Hello.
are the implications of AI for Buddhism?
Well, it's interesting. Implications of AI. Some of them, I'm sure immediately a lot of people are jumping towards these sort of metaphysical arguments or so these arguments about spirituality. But just from a practical point of view, in terms of like integrating stuff into the religion, recently there was a news story about a robot being trained to do Buddhist funeral services in, where was that? Thailand? Do you remember the country where
Japan?
that was? Was it Japan? I can't remember which country. But they were offering basically discount funeral services with this robot. And some people clearly think that's okay because it was
It's cost effective,
People
yeah.
used it and they thought that was still spiritually acceptable. But some people were saying that's not okay and like you're not really giving them proper funeral rites.
Well, the title of the podcast is How Can Faith Help Tackle Artificial Intelligence? How can they work together? So do you think the best way is to accept it?
Well, I think quite a lot of technologies and scientific breakthroughs with some various religions initially meet some sort of contest because it's a new idea, something challenging, new to what is essentially, it's a faith that's been built up over a long time. It's got a lot of stuff to work on, and you're introducing some new challenge to that. But most technologies so far have been integrated into faiths. I think the challenge period tends to. This is not an idea I just made up. This is from. Add this in post-production when I remember the name. But it's this professor who's suggested the idea that a religion responds to most changes in technology by initial initial aggression, followed by sort of tolerance, and then eventually acceptance and sort of integration into religion. So actually a good example of this is like paper printing in like Christianity, where it was like initially it was like, no, you can't have sort of the printing press Bibles for everyone. That's not a good idea. Translating it, not good. This is terrible. But then it was like, okay, fine, we have to accept it. Everyone's doing it. And now it's like encouraged. People are handing you out Bibles on the street. There's Bibles in your hotel rooms. Like it's actively a big part of the religion. So that's, one old technology, which is become very integrated.
So it's more of the unknown that people are worried about.
I think so. I think it's trying to navigate what people are willing to accept about it and what they're not willing to accept about it. But I think people will end up accepting most technologies over time once they're used to it.
What about yourself, Sina? What do you think are the implications for the Baha'i faith for in regards to artificial intelligence?
I think that was interesting what you said about how I think artificial intelligence, I don't see it to be essentially different from other technologies which have come through time. And as humanity advances scientifically and technologically, of course, we'll have new technologies and it brings new challenges. But so what I'll say is only from my perspective of what I understood from, which is somehow inspired by the Baha'i writings. But to what I see, the main challenge, because in all the dystopias or utopias we see, it's all about how a technology which is extremely advanced is used by some people. So in the case of AI, the question and the challenge that comes is that, so we have those very powerful tools that come about, in which, for example, a machine can learn by himself and make decisions. What kind of decisions will that machine make and those things. But then essentially the algorithms are made by man. So basically it puts a challenge to the integrity and to the depth of our ethical values, I guess, as a society.
That's really interesting. You're right, because men will be the ones who program these AI machines. So then in terms of programming emotions, what's good and what's bad from a sort of morality point of view, who is qualified enough to program a machine to believing that something's bad and something's good?
Well, one of the this is a huge subject of AI research, AI safety, trying to decide how you can program a computer to, or not program a computer, but how a computer can be given tasks outside of its initial goal and still have reactions which are compatible with what humans think are good or bad, or what we find acceptable. Most of the sort of forefront of AI research at the moment already doesn't use explicit rules. The thing that people are trying to work for is encouraging the computer to design its own rules. So, for instance, if you've seen the most recent sort of Alpha Zero and all of these, it's playing Go and chess and all of this sort of stuff. In that case, it has learnt up entirely itself how to play Go and what's a good move, what's a bad move, what improves this, without any human input whatsoever. And it actually it did better than the previous version, which had been trained on human input. And there was no explicit rules given to that. So I'm not saying that's a solution, because obviously explicit rules, there's still a clear goal, winning or losing this game, even if the direction towards that is hard. The difficulty for sort of good and evil is, or good and bad, is what is a clear goal? And can we somehow not have a clear goal? Can we sort of get computers even to work out their own goals, which will then align with us in some way? There was a really interesting paper I sort of saw recently. I can't go into details because it was a bit over my head, to be honest. I tried to read it, but it was very difficult, about trying to teach AI safety by trying to get them to learn from stories, because they were arguing that that's how humans learn the values of what they consider good or bad, is basically through folk tales and stuff. And they were like, can we get a computer to understand the morals of folk tales and then try and learn by feeding it a moral system through that? So I think that's what we're trying to, one approach that seems to be going on is not saying this is good, this is bad, but trying to let them learn in the same way a human child will learn to what's good or what's bad.
Isn't that more problematic, the fact that a machine is making those decisions? Isn't that what people are worried about? The fact that a machine will then, I don't know, in sort of dystopian futures that you talk about, know good or bad, good or evil better than humans.
Will know good or evil better than humans.
Yeah. Sort of have a better sense of morality. Well, I guess that that comes into a really tricky question about how we define morality in the first place, right? And that I don't think is a clear answered question, which is why it's kind of, in a way, more sensible to find how do we
learn our own morality rather than trying to start at the end point, because we haven't agreed on an end point, whereas we seem to have some agreement on how we're getting towards that goal. We tend to have, we tend to agree on bringing up children in sort of safe environments, teaching them stories, teaching certain heuristics, which aren't correct in every circumstance, but teaching stuff like, treat others how you would want to be treated, things like that. But then we accept that you shouldn't just be doing that blindly, like in every situation. You should be fiddling around and trying to learn based on other people's reactions. So I think learning is a safer way than, getting something, if something is capable of learning, if machines are capable of learning, which might be possible, then that seems a better way than explicitly telling them what to do.
So treating them like humans in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that's the way of putting it.
What sort of moral implications do you think there are from doing that?
Well, it gets really tricky because sort of current AI, when you think about what people are doing with it, it's not got any, they don't have that kind of reasoning capacity of approaching general problems and sort of approaching the general environment. So morality almost doesn't come into it at this point. But you imagine if you had like some complex machine that could think about the environment and could react with it and feel emotion, say, or something approaching a machine version of emotion. At that point, if you're not treating them like a human or like a creature, that could have moral implications of like, if they then end up behaving badly because we've mistreated them, is that much different from mistreating a child and them react in a bad way? I don't know.
Like you say, the lack of regulation that's there. Do you think there needs to be more regulation on behalf of the government, say?
How do governments know what to do? I think there should be regulation, and there is a lot of work at the moment about like the general AI research community coming together to decide on good best practice and what's safe and what's not safe. And they're trying to decide that with, different governing bodies as well. But essentially, it's a very tricky question because we haven't decided we haven't developed a utopian society or a best practice for bringing people up, bringing real humans up. So it's like really tricky to sort of regulate this kind of practice. And I think people are aware that it is dangerous, and most researchers are trying to regulate themselves in a communal way.
But if it's just like paper printing with the Bible, it's nothing to worry about. And
that had a profound change of effect on society, right?
But did it enhance faith?
That's a big question, right? Who knows? Did it?
I would say it did personally. What do you think?
Well, I didn't live before.
Intuitively.
I didn't live before then, but you could argue that since the printing press and since the access to the Bible, there are fewer, the percentage of Christianity has gone down, or belief in Christianity has gone down, or at least public discussion about that has gone down, and more people are now sort of whereas before you'd have someone interpreting it and talking to you about it and trying to explain problems to you. Now you can think about it for yourself, which I think is a good thing, but that doesn't lead everyone to agree with it. And some people come to very different conclusions about one piece of work, which at one point everyone was coming to similar conclusions about, or at least just accepting similar conclusions about. So yeah, it definitely changed the faith. I'm not sure if you can agree it was entirely an advantage for it, though.
What do you think, Sina?
I just wanted the thing you said about decision-making and morality was quite interesting. And I was thinking about how actually now in AI, decisions are made. Basically, the decisions are made out of solving a problem of optimization. Optimization of resources, of economic optimization, benefits general. So the question is actually, I think it's one of the main pivotal points is the concept of prosperity. What is prosperity? Now in our society, prosperity is defined as economical benefit or as the creation of wealth. So going in the Baha'i writings, prosperity is defined as something both spiritual and material. For a society to be considered as prosperous, it needs to have scientific, technical advances, advances in agriculture, in knowledge, in any aspects of society, and at the same time, it has to go hand in hand with an advance, a moral advance in terms of the acquiring qualities such as truthfulness, such as for we can take it in a small, for example, in an example of a village or something, in a small community. If we have, let's for example, a village. If there's a lot of wealth created, is it automatically going to benefit everyone in the village, or is it going to create more wealth disparities? So if people are not conscious of the fact that they're a community and that they should support each other, that the concept of knowing that they're own one human family, the fact that they all have souls and have a dignity and they should respect each other, help each other out, the fact that there's that concept in the Baha'i faith of there's a writing saying that we should see in each man like a mine rich in gems of an inestimable value, and that only education can enable humanity to benefit from these gems in people's hearts. And if we're conscious of those things, then that village, that community would also be conscious of the fact that giving opportunities to everyone would benefit everyone, because we'll have new quality, new talents coming out of that community. So in the same way, so with that idea of prosperity, it would be very interesting to think of those problems of optimization for those in artificial intelligence, not only in terms of material benefits, but to include other social, moral aspects within it. I guess it's a field that research has to be done in that field, but it would be interesting to.
Well, no, because it's interesting. You talk about kind of like optimization of kind of like what is prosperity, and to bring in some of the Buddhist stuff at this point, because I realize I've been a bit like that. But one of the things I think is interesting about Buddhism, and I'm going to borrow something here from a podcast series I've been listening to, or a lecture series I've been listening to, called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which I really recommend, by this guy called Tom Vervaeke. But he talks about how, or there's this idea that in Buddhism, you have the right path, right? Or you have the right path put to you. The goal in itself, you have this goal, say, I don't know if it's enlightenment, nirvana, or whatever, but you can't know what the goal is. You don't have your optimized reward at the end. You don't really know what it is. What you're given is a path, or like a direction to follow. And actually, the idea is prosperity for humanity, and what is a good, prosperous life isn't to do with what you're getting or like some sort of achieving some goal. It's about the participation. It's what they refer to in this lecture series as participatory knowledge. Like you can't get an AI to do it for you. You can't get anything to do it for you. You can't get other people to do it for you, because you've got to participate in it yourself. And in participating in it, that is what achieves a prosperous life. You can't just passively gain a prosperous life from something else. And in that way, I don't think, AI couldn't achieve prosperity on its own, or at least not prosperity for humanity. I don't think Buddhists would say that was possible.
You were talking about inventions such as printing and things like this, and I find it interesting that all those inventions through time, what they increase mainly is the amount of information we have as humans and the amount of ability to act we have. But one thing we can wonder is, does it really change, does it really interpret anything in itself? The interpretation and the understanding of things still relies on humans. because as individuals we have to understand those information and we have to interpret those things. So basically, I guess as humanity advances and new technologies and arise and sciences advance, we have to learn to learn. Basically, we have to learn to understand things. And even in university and in other aspects of life, we see that information is more easily available to everyone, and it's not the teacher's role to give us information, but it's mostly his role. It should be his role to teach us how to learn and teach us how to understand things. And in the same way, I guess we have to treat those new technologies as new tools that we have to use to understand things better and to make better decisions that we can teach them again, I guess.
And actually tying it into with the course I was talking about, I realized that actually the printing press, in a way, the printing press was slightly misleading as a choice of comparative technology, or maybe a good choice, comparative choice technology, because the idea of because he talks about in the course of the difference between technologies that help you just improve stuff like industrial technologies and what he calls psychotechnologies like reading or like modes of thought, ways of thinking, which actually change your view on the world, and therefore it doesn't just give you extra stuff externally to you. It actually helps you grow as a person, or like everyone grow as people in some way. And like reading and writing is one good example of that. It lets you take it in a whole cognitive landscape that you didn't have access to before. And AI initially seems like it can't do that because it seems to be all happening externally to you. But actually, a lot of the current research being done into AI, a lot of the work being done to that is having a feedback effect into neuroscience. And they're also like taking ideas from neuroscience. And actually, our knowledge of how humans think and human thought is growing from our studies into like trying to mimic thought in something artificial. So even though maybe the stuff we're producing can't help change our view of reality or our landscape, it might be those technologies that lead to other technologies that do help us grow internally as people and not just like externally.
Moving back to faith, because I think we've moved a bit to the side. So you both spoke about how we need to learn how to use these tools and re-engage with sort of reality through these tools and a learning process. Are religious scriptures up to the task of sort of collaborating with these AI tools?
In what sense do you mean?
So, I mean, religious scriptures have lasted how long? If you look at, I don't know, Hinduism, you look at the Vedas, if you look at the Quran, if you look at the Bible's lasted a very long time in terms of people still worship Christ now. And obviously the Old Testament with the Torah. Do you think that religious scriptures will be able to withstand the test of time when it comes to AI?
I think, well, in the Baha'i vision of religion, Baha'u'llah talks about religion being one, and all the prophets of God and all the different manifestations of God with their different titles and missions have served the same purpose of educating humanity at different times. So in the way it's explained in the Baha'i writings, actually all those revelations are relevant for a given time and a given people and have allowed humanity to advance and civilizations to prosper through time. And that when humanity needs new laws or to be reminded of some spiritual values that humanity forgot, or also because we advance scientifically and technically, so we need stronger moral values and new social laws, then in that case, God sends another messenger to teach and guide humanity at that time.
Yeah. I would also say that the idea of, Buddhism in particular, I think is a particularly, it isn't quite so fixed through time. Obviously, some things have been fixed, but I would say it doesn't have the same sort of fixed scriptural faith in the same way. in that there's been many Buddhist writings over the millennia, not all of which agree on everything. You know, there's different debates going on about the nature of the religion exactly. And so and although that might be true in Buddhism, even in religions that seem more fixed, Christianity is a good example. It seems like everyone's following the Bible, but actually interpretations and how that's been adapted into everyday life has constantly changed through time. And I would argue it's only by changing that religions do survive and that faith does survive. I don't think faith can. Obviously, there's an element of faith which is, you know, having faith, accepting stuff, but there's also an element which is, you know, faith in the sort of the world around you, and sort of faith that, you know, these don't have one interpretation. I don't think anything can become an object of faith that can be only interpreted in one logical way. Like, there's got to be all these different views because life is very multifaceted. I think what makes a lot of these religions so special, a lot of these scriptures so special, is the fact that you can keep going back to them and gaining more wisdom from them. And at each point in your life, you read it in a different way. And at each point in humanity's life, they go back and they read it in a different way.
Sort of like you can't step into the same river twice.
Exactly. And in that sense, I think, yes, they will survive AI, but they won't survive in the same way that they exist now. These will always survive, but, you know, they change.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
What's quite interesting in religious scriptures is how when you look at it, sometimes many times you have actually the same concepts coming again, and you have the same kind of stories said in different ways through which the messenger was teaching with an example of a man or someone who did something, teaching the spiritual concepts and things like this. So to me, it seems that those lessons or those teachings are relevant through time, because we have the same kind of challenges that come about through time, even though they're different in intensity and they manifest themselves in different ways. You always have the same challenges of human beings with their ego, of people attracted to wealth, of people neglecting the dignity of some other people, of people not respecting nature. So you have always those same concepts that come about because, we're humans and through time we remain humans. Then the intensity of those challenges change and the way they manifest themselves change as well. So I think they're always relevant. The stories are always relevant, but I guess we have to dive into it more sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also to look into the different scriptures of different religions, because sometimes they give us another perspective which can help us as well.
I certainly agree with that. I think a key thing is I think you kind of lock yourself in a lot of the time if you only look at one particular scripture and don't look at others. I'm not saying like you need to be. That's not saying that you can't be attached to one faith, but the idea is looking at other. It's the same thing as like traveling abroad. Traveling abroad gives you new insight into your own country. Traveling to other religions gives you new insight into your own faith.
One of the things that's I think that's important is this idea of creating a united society. This idea of unity can be based on many things, and what's interesting through religion is that it's a means of unity, because it unites people. People get attracted to the same goals of creating a better life for their community or things like this. And unity brings cooperation, and that's a way how civilization advances and society can advance.
Yes, but arguably, I'm sure, just to preempt Chris, it's also been a cause of disunity when different groups who have unified themselves come across another group that has unified themselves around something else. And it's not always come together in a unified way. That's not to say it's not a force for unification, but it also almost needs to have a wider view than just and I think that's another reason to like be visiting, to have these sorts of interfaith things, discussions, and indeed interfaith, not just discussion but participation, going back to what I said earlier, because you need the unification needs to branch out beyond sort of the initial area. Actually, to tie it into AI, I was thinking it's kind of on the point of, when a lot of early religions that promoted dignity for humanity and dignity for people, or it was aimed really at dignity for people within your tribe. Like certain humans weren't seen as human; they weren't a part of the agreement. And since time's gone on, we've expanded that to pretty much the entirety of the human race. So it'd be interesting if we did get some sort of conscious machine. Would that definition of humanity and things you should treat with dignity expand again? If our knowledge, if it turned out that we could create some sort of conscious being beyond ourselves, or if another conscious being existed somewhere that we met, would we have to expand our definition further? I mean, currently people are animal rights activists are really questioning. This has been a debate going on for a long time, but they're really questioning about like how far do we extend our compassion beyond humanity already.
I think they say sentience is sort of the what can we say, definition of whether someone should be given dignity. And obviously animals are sentient beings. Yeah. So then would an AI machine be considered a sentient being?
Certainly I'd say not yet, but maybe some people already disagree with me. Who knows? And I think people's bars end up, depending on who you chat with, people have very different bars for sentience, because a lot of people argue the animal sentience thing as well. Like, not everyone in the world agrees with that. So yeah, I think that's kind of a really interesting societal debate, which will probably come to the fore as AI research continues and improves.
So in terms of Buddhism, you said that Buddhism maybe wouldn't have too much of an issue with AI compared to other faiths because they're not too focused on a religious text. It's more of a spiritual relationship with the faith. Now, machines, we had this conversation off mic, are physical states as opposed to mental states. Now, do you think that if machines were to develop mental states, it would be more challenging to Buddhism? Because then you would then have to classify them maybe as some sort of...
So this is really interesting, because it's... So is an AI a physical state? Yeah. Because obviously it can be replicated in lots of different machines, and there is a abstraction of it. There's a representation of that structure or of the AI in general, which isn't a physical state. And indeed, it's not a fixed state in and of itself, but it's more a process. It's more like a way of organizing itself. That is sort of what defines a neural network or something like that, right? It's not always fixed in a state and that will give you a thing. It changes and develops, and there's kind of a process behind it. In that way, I mean, also our own intelligence and our own mind is embodied in a way. We are physically embodied in existence, and you can't imagine. Well, usually you can't imagine yourself without a body, or without yourself, or without the context of who you are. Of course, a big part of Buddhism is trying to recognize that that's almost an illusion, and there is that it is an illusion, and actually there can still be a self without any of this other surrounding context and embodiment. But that's, again, something that can't really be explained, but has to be participated in, which makes it a super, super big problem for AI, because there's no way an AI would be able to explain to you if it had a if it suddenly had a self, or it could recognize a self beyond the context it was in. To us, other people are always embodied. It's only in yourself that you can kind of, recognize this illusion of like your own self and the universe around you.
So AI would struggle becoming a Buddhist.
Maybe, but the thing, we would struggle to recognize it as a Buddhist, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because it may be able to achieve the same participatory thing, maybe, but in the same way that, Siddhartha could only give you the way and can like explain to you what it was like to reach that point, you could only see an AI going through the motions to get there. You'd never know what it was. You'd never know its progress.
But you mentioned that priests are like adopting AI to become, churches are adopting AI maybe to become priests. So then would that priest be considered, I don't know, a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because they're using it to perform a ceremony, and they're saying like, oh, this is like sacred enough to perform this ceremony. But I don't think anyone was calling it, nobody thought of the robot as a Buddhist, or did they? Who knows? That's a really good question. I wouldn't think of that robot as a Buddhist. I would, in my case. But then I also wouldn't pay for the robot to do a funeral ceremony for me. So some people did. Really, we need to get one of them on and ask them what they thought. That's the key.
What do you think, Sina?
I was thinking of what we were talking about earlier about how, for example, AI can carry information, but can they really understand things? And that's because true understanding is actually understanding of the soul, or of the intellect as well, which is also a manifestation of our spirit. So I'm sure, they've been able to carry out, to transmit information by saying things that are already written or saying things that they should say. But true understanding of the soul, I'm not sure they could achieve that because,
But yeah. That's really tricky. It's a good point. But I guess for instance, what comes to mind is with this AlphaZero thing with Go again. Before, previously you could have computers that followed instructions to play Go. Not that they were amazing. They couldn't beat human players, obviously. But what was particularly interesting, I think, what people found particularly interesting with AlphaZero during like these matches is that it was playing moves that humans hadn't thought of and that people were surprised by. And a lot of the commentators were going like, "Oh, this is really creative. This is really inventive." And we're using words that are usually only, given to humans. It showed like a level of understanding the game. Now people can argue like, "Oh, well, we can look at all its processing and it went through this path and it used these methods and therefore it's not understanding the game." But perhaps that just gives us insight into how we also understand things, and maybe it did fully understand the game. It's like, yeah.
I think basically it's creating information, of course, by its linking information it already has and through what is available to him.
Right. But it's also in the case of the AlphaZero one, it's also it's not just it didn't have any information given to it. It only had information that it got by interacting with the world, by interacting with this Go board.
Yeah, but still his linking information he has through his sensors and using some methods to create new information and new methods.
But arguably that's what we do as humans as well.
But the question is, are we only this, or do we actually, as you were saying, I believe in the saying that we have a higher self, which is our soul, which is independent of this physical world. And so I think the question that we're actually pondering now is a human being only a set of methods and a set of, are we only processing information and finding new methods and interacting with this world, or are we actually feeding a higher self that comes from a higher being, which we can call God or whatever, and which will continue after this life?
And is that why AI can never outgrow human beings?
Well, So I actually kind of want to flip this around a bit, because I have a very different perspective of the universe to, I think, what you're describing there. Because yes, I agree with you on the sort of like higher self, like something beyond you as this person, you as this physical body. But that's not to say that you're beyond existence and the universe, right? Maybe what we think of as the physical universe, but the point is, with this higher self, this also exists, right? And that is part of the universe. The big key realization, or one of the big moments of realization for me in my spiritual life, was the idea that, you know, you are also part of the universe. You are not separate from the universe. We're all part of it. And in that sense, the universe is its own living thing. And the idea that just because an AI is a physical system, like it's linking knowledge, it's doing all this, you know, it can't have a higher self because it's doing things in this way. Are we just doing things in that way? The point is, both the AI, both all these computers and ourselves are part of existence, are part of the universe. And there's no reason, you know, the universe clearly does have this property of self and, like, you know, these sort of like higher selves. I don't see why that couldn't also be granted to things that aren't humans. Like, I don't know what makes humans unique in that way. We're just a part of the universe that happens to be able to observe itself and to be conscious and do all these things, but other things could also do them.
But did you develop, you said you've been learning it through Buddhism, did you have like a feeling of how it felt once you got that realization to be then part of the universe? Because then could AI experience that sort of feeling? Yeah.
So for me, it was during there was a moment of like a few seconds during a meditation I was doing a few months ago, maybe like back in May, I think it was, where I did feel like it was like your ego, I think it's called ego dissolution, or like it felt like, you know, there wasn't a me anymore, there wasn't a body anymore, there was nothing, but then it was still, it's like you sort of became everything else. And there was no separation between you and everything else. And I think that's quite a common thing. Like, well, certainly it is common enough that I looked it up afterwards and discussed it with people. And it seems that I'm not the only person, obviously, not the only person who's experienced that. And I think it's also, some people say that can happen on like certain hallucinogenics and stuff like that. Not that I've tried that. But yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Like that, you know, but that's not really coming across in words. It just sounds really bland.
But can AI reach the same level of ego dissolution? Is that what you call it? Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have an ego yet, but why not? If it had an ego, couldn't that happen? And also, why not if it was like complex enough and processing enough? Couldn't you reach there? Like, I don't see what's special about the human brain in particular, or the human body in particular, that means that we are the only way that you could possibly experience consciousness and a soul, like in you know, existence.
So that was part 1 of my discussion with Matt and Sina on how can faith help tackle artificial intelligence. As always, let us know what you thought of the podcast by getting in touch on Instagram or Twitter at How Can Faith Help. I hope you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 is out tomorrow. Thank you for listening.